St. Luke's Historic Church and Museum shares stories from the early American religious experience and the movement towards religious freedom. St. Luke's is a 501c3 nonprofit which relies heavily on public charitable contributions. In order to continue quality programming, like the History from the Old Brick Church podcast, your support is crucially important. Visit us at stlukesmuseum.org/donate for more information about St. Luke's and to make a donation. Thank you for your support.
So after Bacon's Rebellion, we do start to see a flood of legislation coming out of the House of Burgesses and also up in Maryland. They kind of mirror each other. And you mentioned one earlier where we kind of turn English common law on its head, where you had primogeniture. Now we're saying things are going to go through on condition of the mother. And there's a sense
only
in which,
for Black people. Only for Black people. In fact, they made that very clear with two different laws. The first one is that the status of the status of the child will follow that of the mother for people for Negroes. That was the term they used. And then they came back and said this only applies to Black people. It does not apply to white people. Yes.
Yeah. So on the one hand, there seems to be a movement to try to discourage any kind of now interracial coupling. Yes. But on the other side of it, they've also incentivized it, because if it's on condition of the mother, then a white slaveholder will increase his wealth by producing children through the mother.
Yes. And there have been a number of scholars who have said it was designed to incentivize, it was designed to excuse and to allow. And of course, yes, while you did have white and Black servants who were intermingling with each other, as the century continued, the 17th century continued into the 18th century, you would see really more and more people who had direct access to Africans were elite white men, as opposed to white males who were servants. Because by the 1760s, you would begin to see the shift happen. Up until that time, the majority of servants were still white. And you still had more white servants than you had enslaved people. But after 1760, that shift happened, and you began to see more enslaved Africans in Virginia and other colonies, as opposed to white servants. And so with that shift, you would really begin to see more white men who were elite in direct contact with Africans, and especially African women. And you would see this growth of what is really called a mulatto population. It is a generalized term. It doesn't just mean someone who's half white and half Black. It means someone who's simply mixed. And whether that mixture is a mixture of Native and African or white and African, mulatto always included an African component in it. And you would see, generally speaking, an erasure of Native peoples as a designated group in a lot of Virginia. There would be pockets. But they began to erase them, and they entered, as I said, into this sort of mulatto category. So really understanding that is a challenge as well. If you go to certain areas, like, Nat Turner, for example, his family was very much connected with the Nottoway peoples. And they're, even today, most of the people haven't left. Their descendants continue to live on the same land. And so for a lot of those individuals, they grew up identifying as African American, but they also had Native American ancestry and their ancestors that lived on that land for many, many centuries. And so this kind of understanding of who people are um, is very different than how they were designated. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. And so our ethnic past is a lot more interesting, a lot more complicated than the way that the records have painted that picture.
And these so-called anti-miscegenation laws are the first places where we actually see in law the category of white. First in
Yes.
Maryland, I think in the 1680s, and then 1691, I believe it is in Virginia. So categorizing yourself as white now has the ability to have a permanent class of servitude. You can't grow out of it because you can't change your skin color.
Right. And it is accompanied with certain privileges in the law. And so you would see, for example, some of these individuals who were intermingled with whites, sometimes 3 or 4 generations later, they're now designated as white because they've been intermarrying with whites for 2 or 3 generations. And so a lot of people whose families have been here for 400 years uh, find that when they research their ancestry, they find that they have a Black ancestor that they didn't know about. And it's because the 17th century was an evolving society that once you entered into and the records designated you as white, it kind of tried to erase your past. And from that point on, the families didn't talk about that either because they wanted to make sure that they were always seen as white, because with whiteness you had privilege, you had a force of law that protected your rights, your property, your family, et cetera, et cetera. And so the 17th century was really a fluid period, but it was also a period that began to construct race and construct racial divisions and to construct inequality and racism in our society and in the law.